start with a couple of angles for this title fight, because what we're going to do here too is it's funny. Last night I went down a little bit of a wormhole, and I've said this before, right? When we're talking about UFC and using some stats, right? Using more stats to get more statistical profiles of these guys and to look at them from a numerical perspective, as opposed to just watching the fights, right? And handicapping it that way. I like to use a mix of the two. Well, I went down the wormhole of stats yesterday and realized that I barely scratched the surface. We'll get to that momentarily, but I wanted to play this clip if we have it, Jacob. So Humans and I were talking about this the other day. When we talked about this, I believe it was, what day was it? I don't know. They all melt together. Wednesday? The thought of Jorge Masvidal was actually getting ready for Usman the entire time, right? Like, he knew that that was the fight that he wanted. This was the original fight that Dana and the UFC wanted. Ultimately falls through with negotiations to Masvidal. Burns comes in, and here we are now because Burns tests positive for COVID. So Masvidal, we had thought, had been getting ready for this fight. Well, Dustin Poirier actually was on Teddy Atlas's podcast or videocast, whatever you want to call it, but did talk about this and said, yeah, Masvidal, he's actually been getting ready for Kamaru Usman this entire time.
You know, it's a short notice because he didn't have the contract signed. But let me tell you what, this guy was there my whole training camp, was my main sparring partner. We probably put in 5 weeks of sparring together. He flew in wrestlers, the best wrestlers in the world. I think they put him up, and then the guys were there just for George, just for Masvidal to use. And the guy never stopped training. Even when the fight fell through and they gave it to Burns, it was at the end of my training camp, George was still in the gym every day like he had a fight. I don't know if he knew something that we didn't, but the guy was in training camp the whole time and never stopped. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people with what the kind of shape he's in. His timing is going to be good because he was in my camp the whole time. You know,
so Usman right now, 220 favorite, Masvidal plus 190, round prop 4.5, shaded to the under at minus 150. So this is, to me, this is a classic example. You can have a change of opinions, right? And if you remember when we talked to Humans the other day, I thought my initial lean here, especially when Usman was up to minus 305, that Masvidal was going to be, I think, worth it at a price like that. Now, as the price has shrunk, and the more that I have studied this fight, the more I think that Usman, not only the statistical profile, which we're going to get to momentarily, is impressive for a guy like Kamaru Usman, but just the style in which he fights, and just the style is pleasing to the eye, how good he actually can be. Look at his last fight against Covington, right? I mentioned this with Danny. Usman, who is a guy who will take you to the ground, who wants to wrestle, clinch, stood up the entire time with Covington, outstruck him, and ended up finishing him in the 5th round, ended up breaking his jaw at one point in that fight. He's very meticulous with the striking, likes to pick his spots, and he was extremely impressive. So let's throw this up. You have tails of the tape, right? In the UFC, it gives you the height, the weight, the age, the reach, all of these things. Well, this is a statistical tail of the tape, if you will, for these two fighters. We're going to have one for each fight on the main card. So you see this, there's 3 key statistics that we have right here. So net significant strike differential. This is just essentially, you look at it, UFC stats page, they give you the amount of significant strikes landed per minute. They give you the amount of significant strikes absorbed per minute. This is just the net rating between the two of them, right? So Kamaru Usman plus 2.43 in terms of his net significant strike differential, which means he's landing about 2.5 more significant strikes per minute than the opponent that he's facing, right? Takedown average is how many takedowns that they actually successfully have. 3.44 takedown average, successful takedowns landed every 15 minutes, right? And then you have the takedown defense, which is the percentage of opponents' takedown attempts that did not land. Kamaru Usman has never been taken down in his UFC career. You can see that the takedown average lends itself to, again, the profile that we talked about, a guy who wants to take you down, who wants to wrestle, clinch, and wear you down. And you look at a guy like Jorge Masvidal, and again, this is just from a statistical standpoint, the differential is not as solid. Jorge Masvidal will absorb a little bit more to deal a little bit more, and he's a guy who prefers to stand up. You can just see that in the takedown average. Lands 1.7 takedowns every 15 minutes. The takedown defense, not as great either, 78%. So what did I like so much? What changed my mind here when I looked at this, when I initially thought Masvidal, researched a little bit more, and then liked Usman? Well, Usman defensively has been absolutely great, and you see that in the differential as well. And you just go back to his last fight again against Covington, how much you can actually lock in and from a defensive standpoint start to play his game on the feet. He looks like he's improved a lot as a striker. But then you just look at the profile again and how he wants to fight. Jorge Masvidal coming in on short notice is going to get pressed up against the cage a lot. He's going to be dealing with Usman on top of him, I think, a lot in this fight. Now, Usman's a patient guy. We talk about this all the time when in terms of, like, I used it last week, or what was it, 2 weeks ago, with the Hooker-Poirier card. When you look at guys in terms of their average fight time, right? And we had a couple of guys, we had the new kid, and the names escape me, but regardless, the average fight time for two of these guys, Poirier and Hooker, excuse me, both over 9 minutes. On top of a couple of other things, led me to play the over. Kamaru Usman's a guy who loves to take it to the cards, take it to the judges. He's really patient, wins a lot by decision, not really a finisher by any sorts. To me, this looks like a long, drawn-out fight. 4.5 is the proper round prop. But Usman, in the way that he fights, I just think it's just such a bad stylistic matchup for a guy like Jorge Masvidal. So Usman by decision, about plus 160. Usman by KO and TKO, it's there, but it's about plus 180. I think I'd want a little bit more, about plus 250, somewhere in that range if I'm going to play that. But Kamaru Usman by decision is something I'm definitely looking at here. It's one of these fights where I came in thinking one thing, and just watching Usman, watching Masvidal, the way they fight, and just looking at the numbers behind these guys, you can't help but be impressed to think that Usman actually has quite the edge against Jorge Masvidal. So, other fights on the card, of course, it is a very big card. 3 title fights. Usman defending his strap, of course. We have a vacant title fight as well for the bantamweight division, but let's go Volkanovski and Holloway as well. Featherweight title bout, a rematch between these two. Volkanovski opened up as a $2 favorite over Holloway in multiple spots. Right now at around minus 210 with a round prop of 4.5. So let's look at the numbers behind these two guys. Because if you look at a guy like Volkanovski, actually, and both of these guys are actually, as we know, right, if you follow mixed martial arts, which I think a majority of people do who are watching the show at this point, both are talented strikers. Max Holloway, a little bit more in terms of volume, right? And you can kind of see that. Volkanovski, a little bit more skilled in terms of the fewer strikes that he absorbs per minute. The net differential for him, plus 3.01. Max Holloway, plus 2.21. Takedown average, Volkanovski is much more likely to attempt some takedowns and take you down, landing 2.1, essentially, takedowns every 15 minutes. And the takedown defense for both, really solid. Max Holloway's a little bit better, but the takedown average for Holloway, as you see there, very minimal. He wants to stand up. He wants to fight. He wants to strike. Here's the interesting thing about this matchup is how much has Max Holloway learned from his loss to Volkanovski? Because in that loss, Volkanovski, the game plan was pretty clear. He worked the crap out of Holloway's legs. He just hit him with leg kicks the entire fight, forcing him to switch stances, forcing him to get uncomfortable on his feet. Holloway, for some reason, refused to check those kicks throughout the entire bout, and it was a big reason why Volkanovski ended up winning on points. So when you look at that from that perspective, it does Holloway, and what does he learn from that fight? The thing here is, when I watch that, and when you watch Volkanovski fight overall, a very skilled striker, and he's a very balanced guy, but he has so much power because the usual weight that he walks around is, I think, well over 200 pounds. This is a guy that's usually carrying a lot more. So when you cut down on that weight, but you still have that power, the cardio is absolutely phenomenal for a guy like Volkanovski. I feel like, and as we're going through these fights, I kind of felt like as I was researching this card more throughout the week, it seems, at least according to my research and what I like and what I'm leaning to, that it's going to be a chalky card. Like for this one, Holloway's a really good striker. We know about Holloway's history, but I couldn't find myself making a good enough case to want to play a guy like Max Holloway at a dog price, again, sitting about plus 190 or so. But so Volkanovski, to me, probably the winner here. Not enough to look at not enough to look at like a method of victory prop, right? Like we were talking about with Usman. Not really interested in that. I can give you the numbers, of course, when you look at that. And then these are courtesy, by the way, of William Hill. But if we're looking at a guy like, here we go. Come on. I lost it. I hate when this thing, there it is. It refreshes, then it goes out of order. If we're looking at method of victory, Volkanovski by decision, plus 110. Holloway by decision, 3-1. Volkanovski, KO or TKO, 4-1. Holloway by KO or TKO, 7-1. Then you have submission, 14-1 and 16-1, respectively, for Holloway and Volkanovski. And this is another one that has a really big round prop, sitting in the range of about 4.5, which would make some sense. And this is another one that I would believe is probably going to go to the cards. Third fight on this one, Jan and Aldo. I didn't really have a good feeling for this one at all, but I did want to throw this up because I thought this was interesting because Jose Aldo for a while, of course, has been a dominant fighter. Moves up to bantamweight and mixed results up to this point now, moves to bantamweight, I should say. But Aldo opens up as a plus 175 dog. He's still sitting in that range right now. What surprised me, though, with the numbers for Aldo is the fact that his net striking differential is really not that good. Plus 0.29. Takedown average, of course, is 0.64. Aldo wants to stand up and bang. Jan wants to stand up and bang as well. I'll say this, though. When I look at this fight, my initial thought was that maybe doing a little bit more research on Jan, because he's not a guy that I've watched a lot of. I'll freely admit that. Going back and watching his fight with Uriah Faber, going back and watching his fight with Jimmy Rivera, the win against John Dodson as well, 2 of those coming by decision. And then, of course, he knocks out Uriah Faber with a head kick. He beat Faber up pretty bad there, and Faber didn't really want to play his game. For some reason, Faber was willing to stand and strike with Jan. We really should have probably been working the clinch a little bit more. But regardless, Jimmy Rivera gave him a little bit of a tough time in that fight. And Jan does have some really good sneaky power. And he's another one of these meticulous fighters in terms of choosing his spots. And when he lands, he'll land hard, and you won't want to feel it. But at the same time, when a guy like Jimmy Rivera is giving him a little bit of trouble, it makes me think a striker of Aldo's level could potentially actually give him some issues in this fight as well. But again, didn't have the strongest opinion on this. Now, Rose Namajunas taking on Jessica Andrade. This is, I think, fascinating because I like these numbers a lot, right? And if you've listened to the show, watched the show, you know how much I like to use the numbers for a lot of these sports. It gives me a little bit more comfort in something you can find out what either a team is like, a fighter's like, whatever it is, just by looking at some of their statistics. It's funny. I like Rose Namajunas a lot in this matchup, but a lot of it comes from what I saw in their first meeting, where Rose Namajunas picked her apart in the first round, opened her up, got a little unlucky, the clinch, got slammed in her head, and the fight ended there in the second round. And then you look at some of the stats for this fight, right? Rose Namajunas, who's a $2 favorite, statistically does not look like a fighter that is probably worth being a $2 favorite over Jessica Andrade. We could throw it up. Her net significant striking differential, just plus 0.07 for Rose Namajunas. Her takedown averages, she's going to land 2.2, we'll call it, takedowns every 15 minutes. Jessica Andrade, though, her net significant strike differential much better at plus 1.3. She'll average about 3.2 takedowns every 15 minutes. Takedown defense for Andrade, too, is much better than Rose Namajunas at 76%. So this is why I really like things like, it interests me when I see stuff like this, because my eyes, when I was watching the fight, tell me one thing, but as much as I enjoy numbers, I look at numbers for this matchup and I think, wow, I think statistically Rose Namajunas looks like she's up against it. However, for this fight alone, I'm going to go back on what I watched in the first round, which is Jessica Andrade. And by the way, watching Andrade over the last few fights, having a lot of trouble dealing with fighters who can stand up and really, really get technical with the striking. So Namajunas, again, maybe looking at her in terms of a method of victory prop by decision. In that range would be something I think I'd be more comfortable with. I don't think this is a fight that is going to end in a finish like last time. This is going to be one that goes to the cards, and I think Namajunas is going to end up winning with her stand-up game because she was really picking Andrade apart in their first matchup. All right, we got 20. We'll save the Paige Van Zandt, Amanda Ribas bout. Ribas is a big favorite for a reason. You'll see it in the numbers, and we can throw that up really quickly before we move on to our next topic when we come back. But it definitely looks like Paige Van Zandt is up against it in her final fight for the Ultimate Fighting Championship as he enters free agency and potential retirement. But we have plenty to get to here on the show. Last 45 minutes or so, don't go anywhere. This is The Edge here on VSiN.
VSiN, the sports betting network, has more ways than ever for you to connect with us. Introducing the VSiN lineup of podcasts. We've included all of VSiN's expert betting analysis and insights into new podcast options for your listening pleasure. Increase your sports betting knowledge with Josh Applebaum's Market Insights. Best Bets bring you the top highlights from VSiN daily programs. And the Ron Flatter Racing Pod keeps you up to date on horse racing. Download all the VSiN podcasts from your favorite podcast provider today.
All right, remember to check out Point Spread Weekly. It is free until the major sport returns. Of course, headline story, Kamaru Usman taking on Jorge Masvidal in UFC 251 in Abu Dhabi. Fight Island, first card being hosted there. But it's all much more, of course, than just Fight Island and UFC 251. Every single sport covered in this bad boy and much more. Plus, if you sign up for Point Spread Weekly and a VSiN Plus sub, it's free until a major sport returns. Check it out. You get 24/7 video stream and replays, afternoon email links to show highlights, special betting guides, access to exclusive stories, and proprietary handicapping data on VSiN.com. So check out VSiN.com/subscribe for details. Remember, free until a major sport returns. Okay. Last fight on the main event. Before we move on to bigger I've had bigger and better things. I don't think anything gets bigger than UFC 251 this weekend. Regardless. So let's take a look at the Paige Van Zandt, Amanda Ribas fight that is going to happen. First event of the main event, or excuse me, first bout of the main card. Sorry, it's Friday. I just want to get out of here. So Ribas opens up as a $6.50 favorite. Right now, well over $8 in a lot of spots. Van Zandt seems, obviously, from a price perspective, up against it. And then you look at this from a statistical perspective. Paige Van Zandt, her again, so just to walk you through one more time if you're watching this. So net significant strike differential. You just look at the amount of significant strikes landed per minute with the amount of significant strikes absorbed per minute. The differential between the two just gives you an idea of where these fighters are at in terms of the punishment they dole out and what they receive. So like Amanda Ribas, for example, and again, like this is also, I think, part of the conversation too, especially when it comes to the female divisions, is the level of talent, because we know that female divisions are very top heavy, right, when it comes to the UFC. And so, like, when it comes to Amanda Ribas, when you look at a net significant strike differential of plus 3.14, she's obviously very skilled, but how much of that is the competition that she has faced up to this point? But we know that Paige Van Zandt has been around for a while, and these are some numbers that are just really troubling in this matchup, right? You look at a net significant strike differential of plus 0.77, just barely positive. You look at the fact that her takedown average, she's not going to want to go to the ground, just landing 1.3 takedowns every 15 minutes. Again, so every 15 minutes, we're talking about a 3-round fight. She's only going to land about 1 takedown in that bout. And then you look at the takedown defense for her, right? We're talking about a takedown defense of just 35%. So you pair it up with Amanda Ribas, who has a great net significant strike differential, whose takedown average she'll land 2 every 15 minutes. I would expect that to go up against Paige Van Zandt, who's got a takedown defense of 35%. And you know that Van Zandt's not going to take her down because, one, she doesn't want to. You see it right there in the takedown average. The other part is that Ribas has an 85% takedown defense. So somebody who's somewhat poor in terms of taking down her opponents, pretty good shot that she's not going to have success against Ribas here. So it makes a lot of sense, this massive price as it stands right now, Paige Van Zandt taking on Ribas. And it's just, you look at it overall, and maybe you want to play an index prop, the method of victory, things of that nature, in this spot for Ribas, but you're going to be paying a premium. It's not going to be one of those where you have such a massive favorite at this point right now, where you're going to be able to negate some of the juice you'd lay with like a Kamaru Usman, for example, winning by decision at plus 160. So, yes, Van Zandt's up against it. Not surprising, especially when you see how massive that price is in this bout. So just to recap really quickly. So for me, I'll be the one bout for sure that I'll be playing, Usman, in this fight against Jorge Masvidal. More than likely, Usman by decision. Right now, best price at about plus 160. I'm going to fish around to see if I can get something better than that. The other part, too, is maybe to pair, and this is the other way to do it, right? Instead of saying Kamaru Usman by decision, do I play this over the round prop? Because, again, we're looking at 4.5 shaded to the under at minus 150. In a couple of spots, you're getting plus 130 on the over 4.5 over at William Hill. But this is a fight that I would expect that Usman wins and that it goes to the cards. But Masvidal, it's by the way, it's kind of a win-win situation for Masvidal, right? If we're just talking about narrative, you take it on 6 days' notice. You had to cut 22 pounds over, 5.5 days. If you lose, you took a fight on short notice. Big whoop. If you win, you just won a title because in a fight that you took on short notice. So, but yeah, Usman in that fight, something I'm going to play. Also thinking about playing Holloway and Volkanovski over as well, but I got priced out of that pretty quickly. That round prop sitting at 4.5 over minus 240. Double check where, it hasn't moved much since the last 24 hours, but that is a fight that I think maybe goes to the cards as well, and playing a guy potentially like Volkanovski in terms of method of victory at about plus 110 by decision. Maybe want a little bit more on that and hold off and see if Holloway can garner some support there and get a little bit more on the decision for Volkanovski. But for sure, Kamaru Usman by decision, that'll be posted up today. Once I find a good price, that'll be posted up by the time we get to Saturday. And I'm curious too, Masvidal is a really big fan favorite, right? I wonder where this price gets on Usman in terms of pre-flop. And maybe this gets below $2. I don't know. Hold out on that. Because if it gets below $2, maybe well worth looking at as well for Kamaru Usman against Jorge Masvidal. All right. We have plenty to get to. We have our clip of the week today as well. We'll have that in the D block with our Memphis Grizzlies preview because Doug Kazarian, I thought, had a great nugget when he joined the guys on Follow the Money about home court and playing some of these underdogs. But when we come back, National Football League, the Atlanta Falcons are in our crosshairs.